those central banks see a monetary reset on the horizon. They can read the tea leaves as well as anybody else, see the amount of debt that's being taken on by the countries with the big fiat currencies. And they understand that in the not too distant future, some kind of a reset is going to happen, and they want X amount of gold. They want plenty of gold to back their currencies.
Now through Monday, April 7th, in honor of Silver Squeeze 2.0, for any Monster Box of Silver Eagles, we'll give you 2 additional Silver Eagles at no cost. And unlike some other Silver Squeeze deals, there's no limit. So if you purchase 1 Silver Eagle Monster Box, you get 502 Silver Eagles. If you purchase 10 Monster Boxes, you're getting a full tube of Eagles for no cost. Call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. I am always delighted to receive this returning guest, John Rubino, formerly the founder of dollarcollapse.com, now with his own Substack. We'll talk about that more. Joins us again for an update on his prolific research and writings. John, thanks for joining us this Monday, March 31st, 2025.
Hey, Dunnigan. Good to be back. There's lots to talk about.
The thing that blows me away is every time we have you on here, and you've been here basically once a month since forever, we have some excited people who write in the comments, this guy is great, you should get him back on again. So just so everyone knows, John is on our channel about once a month, and he gives us that time to bring us up to date on his latest research. And John, you write, I guess it feels like almost daily, certainly it's multiple times per week, on a number of topics, both about actionable things that people can do right now to improve their preparedness, not just theory or philosophy, but action steps that they can take both on the practical side as well as on the financial side. And you also you weigh in with a lot of analysis as an economist on what's going on, not only financially, but geopolitically around the world and in areas of concern to ordinary people trying to live their lives. So we're grateful for all of that. We happen to be today witnessing a breakout of gold well above not only 3,000, but above 3,100 for the first time ever dollars. And you had some interesting observations around that. You've been watching that closely. Can you bring us up to date on your latest thinking about what's happening?
Yeah, wouldn't that be cool if $3,000 an ounce turned out to be support now instead of resistance? Because I think, what I definitely expected, and I think what a lot of other people expected too, was that once gold touched 3,000, it would bounce off of it. In other words, that would create a lot of people who want to do profit taking at $3,000 an ounce, because people love those big round numbers. And so I kind of expected like a year of bouncing off of 3,000 and dropping down to 2,500 over and over until it worked off all the profit taking. That did not happen. Gold went up to $3,000 an ounce and has stayed above it for, I guess, a few weeks now. I'm not sure exactly of the time frame, but it's been a while, and now it's above 3,100. So it could be that the world's central banks, at least the BRICS country central banks, who are accumulating gold and who have been probably driving most of the price action of this bull market, aren't that price sensitive. It could be that like the People's Bank of China has gotten an order to accumulate X amount of gold, and they're just going to be in there buying until they get the number of tons that they've been ordered to accumulate. That's great news for gold. And it also indicates that those central banks see a monetary reset on the horizon. They can read the tea leaves as well as anybody else, see the amount of debt that's being taken on by the countries with the big fiat currencies. And they understand that in the not too distant future, some kind of a reset is going to happen. And they want X amount of gold. They want plenty of gold to back their currencies, either as a fallback, just protection in case things get very volatile, or as a way of backing their currencies in a new gold standard, if that's what we go to. So we don't know whether it's going to be a new Bretton Woods or some gigantic crisis that forces countries individually to do things with their currencies. There's no way to know how that's going to play out. But either way, lots of gold on your balance sheet is a good thing. It's very helpful with any kind of insecurity and crisis that happens going forward. So, to the extent that the central banks of the world aren't done loading up on gold and they recognize this looming crisis out there, there's no real way to predict how high gold can go because you've got entities with unlimited printing presses and they're not price sensitive. So we'll just have to see. I'm a little nervous about gold having gone this far, this fast, and entering its seasonal weak period pretty soon here. The old saying, sell in May and go away, is applicable to gold. And I don't know how many years it's been where I decide that this time, macro forces are going to swamp seasonality and I buy or I stick with positions that maybe I should have lightened up on. And I'm sorry I did. So I'm still nervous about this, but at the same time, cautiously optimistic that this might be a new era for gold because we're getting so close to what is going to be some kind of a currency crisis / currency reset.
Yeah, you mentioned it's good for gold. There's so many observations and emotions that people who call me talk to me about this whole phenomenon. One is relief that a sense of reality or a sense of sanity evidenced by the preference for real things, for intrinsically valuable things, is exerting itself not only domestically but especially globally, because it seems like we've been in la-la land for so long, and that people who are responsible and mature and have had some life experiences know that you can only go so long before the deferred pain is going to hurt way more if you just keep kicking the can down the road. And so we've had a lot of things, both socially and financially, that have seemed insane or anti-gravity or whatever in our country and in the world. And so for some people, there's a relief here that, okay, this is a return to common sense or sanity, and that can be a relief. There's also concern that if it's recognition of challenging, tough times or a convulsive reset ahead, that's very sobering. It's that, people have said, gee, when gold is high, that doesn't mean, it means life is challenging. If the party is going to be over with a reset, that kind of thing. So, and there's also a shifting geopolitical power shifts that seem to be happening with the BRICS Plus nations taking out positions that evidently are perhaps much different in principle or in foundation by being backed by gold, for example, than the Western, or you could say the U.S./Britain, New York/ Washington and London centered financial world. Any comments from you on this? Is this a good omen or a bad omen for the world in general? And you, as the author of dollarcollapse.com, probably do have a way of weighing in on that.
Well, people don't change their minds easily, and they certainly don't give up power easily. So it takes a crisis for a big societal sea change to start to look like the least bad option, and that's when it happens. So usually you have a crisis, and then you rebuild from the rubble of that crisis something new, and hopefully better. But that's no guarantee. But yeah, that's where we're headed, and one of the ways we're headed that way is, as you said, a lot of people are waking up. It's still a relatively small number compared to the number of people who exist right now. But you see people moving into real assets, and some of them are heavy hitters. Bill Gates is the biggest owner of farmland in the world right now, and Warren Buffett is dumping tech and finance stocks and buying energy stocks. He's just buying the hell out of Occidental Petroleum right now, and he's raising a lot of cash. So you see some big players doing things that kind of align with the gold bug thesis, the gold bug point of view, which is to get out of financial assets and into real assets. And to the extent that that idea is spreading, that's a good thing, because that means more and more people are preparing correctly for what's coming. And for them, this kind of crisis, it's still a minefield, because you could load up on gold and silver and they go up, and that's great. But you might lose your job, or some loved ones might lose their jobs, or any other kind of crisis can happen that impacts your life in some way beyond your finances. But to the extent that people are loading up on real assets, they're at least addressing the risks to their finances. And if this goes on long enough, and then we have the crisis, the stackers and the preppers will end up being the people with serious capital who are instrumental in rebuilding the system, or implementing a new system. So I think those are sensible people. And if they're the ones who have a big role in creating the next monetary system, well, that would be just fine, But for most people, a currency crisis is a really bad thing because most people basically trust the government because they have their own lives to lead. They don't spend much time obsessing over, interest on the government's debt and things like that, like we do. So they don't see this thing coming with enough time to prepare for it usually. And so they're the ones who are going to be hurt. And they're the ones who least deserve it. They're regular people living their lives. They've got a lot of dollars in a bank account. Their IRAs have a lot of government bond related stuff in there, or bank stocks or whatever, things that are going to be hurt when the currency loses value dramatically. And that sucks. They're the people who really don't deserve to be hurt. But the way it works historically is that currency resets, currency devaluations, things like that, they hurt the people who aren't paying attention and help the people who are paying attention. And usually the people that are paying attention skew towards rich enough to have a financial advisor who can clue them in. So the rich people who are out there buying real estate, or at least farmland versions of real estate right now, or who are loading up on gold and silver or energy stocks or uranium stocks, they're going to be okay. The vast majority of people will emphatically not be okay. And they're the ones who we have to hope that, combined with a monetary reset, there's some kind of a government policy to help them get through it.
You mentioned real estate. We're going to get back to that a little bit later. We also wanted to mention, because today has been denoted Silver Squeeze 2.0. This is Monday, March 31st, and there's a significant crowd of retail investors on X, and it's reminiscent of the first Silver Squeeze several years ago, where there was this idea that if enough small retail investors could each grab whatever they could afford to store into physical silver, that it would drain the exchanges and the stockpiles dry enough to kind of expose the falsehoods of the rehypothecation schemes that are being played at the paper derivative level by big players to keep the price suppressed. Any thoughts from you on this new Silver Squeeze 2.0 day today, and what it might mean from a practical standpoint regarding silver's price or availability, or what it at least symbolizes in terms of awakening of people about real things?
Yeah, the backstory here is really funny because, and I know it pretty well because one of my sons was involved in it. But a few years ago, as you said, online stock traders, because of a brokerage house called Robinhood that got set up during the pandemic that let you trade for free, basically. And then they sold your information to high frequency traders, but they let you trade for free. So a lot of people, they were stuck in their apartments. There was nowhere to go. They were tired of video games. So they adopted stock trading and option trading as another kind of video game. And they figured out that they could all get together on a forum like Reddit and then target a stock that had a lot of hedge fund shorts attached to it. They would go in, buy the stock all at once some morning, force the price of that stock up, and then force the hedge funds to cover. And, so in other words, they would engineer a short squeeze. And they would make a ton of money, and then they would sell out, and they would go on to the next stock that they were going to use to victimize the hedge funds. And at some point in that process, they decided they would do silver too. They were going to go in and just buy so much silver that they would force the price up. And then the banks that are short silver would have to cover their short positions by buying silver, and that would send the price through the roof. And so everybody was all excited about that in the precious metal space, because these guys seem to have serious power. They were bankrupting hedge funds. And it turned out silver was too big of a market. You know, the amount of money it takes to move GameStop or something like that was minuscule compared to what you need to move the silver market, apparently. So that thing just fizzled and the idea just went away. But now it's back. You know, now the dynamics of the silver market make it look ripe for a short squeeze, because the silver market is already in deficit. In other words, we're using more silver than we're producing, which means we're running through above ground stocks of silver, and we're going to run out in any event. You know, so there's a default on some of the metal exchanges probably coming in any event. And so these guys who, I don't know if it's the same people, but the next generation version of those Reddit traders from a few years ago have targeted silver. And cool, you know, except today was supposed to be the day. And silver is down while gold is up, you know? So silver is performing worse than expected instead of better than expected. So we'll see if it was just a, you know, false alarm where people were kind of trolling the gold bugs to see what would happen. But I think there could be an element of, you know, young traders playing it as a video game in the silver market when silver does take off, because the dynamics of the silver market are that the deficit will turn into a shortage. That'll lead to panic buying. That will bust the COMEX or whatever, forcing them to default, and then silver goes straight up. That's probably the kind of thing that is out there waiting to happen. And if helping that along is a bunch of individual traders out there playing it like a game, that would be fine with me. You know, the market has been manipulated down for such a long time that if somebody's going to come in and manipulate it up, that would be poetic justice, I think. And it'd be great for the stackers. You know, can you imagine if silver goes to $100 an ounce, which eventually it will, but imagine it doing it quickly, you know, in the space of a few months. And think about how many rich stackers there are going to be out there and how much fun that's going to be. So that is a possibility for our little segment of the world in the not too distant future.
It's ironic that Silver Squeeze 1.0 that happened a few years back was branded as a form of financial domestic terrorism, and Congress was scrambling around seeing what they could do to prevent this from ever happening again, because heaven forbid that ordinary grassroots people would talk to each other and decide that they've had enough. Whereas the 8 billion banks that Ed Steer or previously Ted Butler kept warning us about that have been acting in concert and almost in synchronicity for the past several decades, whenever, you know, and trading at the worst possible times from a normal trading mindset standpoint, but it would be the best possible time if what your goal was to move the price, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that actually is a really important part of the story, because the government did intervene in a blatantly unconstitutional way in that market. They basically said, yeah, you know, hedge funds who are short, they're allowed to trade GameStop or whatever. But Reddit traders who want to buy it, no, you can't do that for a few days until the hedge funds are able to get out of their shorts, which is crazy. You know, that just short circuits the whole idea of free markets. But the government did it and got away with it, you know. And as far as I know, nobody went to jail for that. No government bureaucrat who violated the Constitution went to jail for that. I'm not sure about the Reddit traders, if any of them were prosecuted for this kind of thing. But yeah, that's another, since there's a precedent, that's another possible angle in this thing as it plays out now going forward. So we'll just have to see. But we know that governments will protect hedge funds now, and of course, protect the big banks in this kind of a situation. But it seems like if that happened to silver, wouldn't that make you want to go get some physical silver? You know, if governments are intervening to depress the silver market, and they're that desperate enough to violate the Constitution to do it, that's a sign of weakness, not strength. So I think there's a decent chance that causes physical silver to just dry up and go away. And it becomes unobtainium, you know, where you can't get it. You can offer pretty much any price, but there's none available for immediate shipment. And I think governments intervening in that way would bring that on. So it could be something that backfires for them if they try it again.
Yeah, there's a saying, to learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize. And it seems like that may be applied here is, if you want to find out who's really in charge, find out who can't be held accountable for their behavior when you do the same thing and you're told that that's a wrong thing, but it's not a wrong thing when this other party organization does it. We wanted to talk with you also about your observations of geopolitical hotspots and trends around the country. We've touched on at least one that may be noteworthy or related. That's the alliance of BRICS plus nations that are pivoting away from the U.S. dollar and the U.S. treasuries for gold and for a settlement currency solution between themselves that does not involve the U.S. dollar and the SWIFT system, et cetera. Any other major geopolitical developments in addition to that you've been watching that you think people should be aware of right now?
Well, yeah, the Mideast is, as usual, kind of a nightmare. And Trump seems to be threatening Iran. Well, they're bombing the Houthis, which, those guys are like goat herders who got a hold of some Iranian drones or something like that. And they're shooting at ships passing through the strait right there. But it doesn't seem like a thing for the U.S. to be involved in because it's mostly European trade that passes through there. So I would say let Europe handle that. But we're handling it, of course, because we're the world's policemen. And then Iran could easily be a flashpoint. That could be one of those things where we wake up some morning and we're at war with Iran. On the bright side, we're no longer in danger of blundering into World War III in Ukraine, at least. The negotiations are a little bit rocky, but that's to be expected. I mean, Putin and Trump trying to negotiate something has to have some fireworks, right? Because those guys, they won't give up on their objectives very easily, and they're both willing to bluster. So, we're seeing some saber rattling there, but nothing compared to what we saw when we were giving weapons to Ukraine that could reach inside of Russia, and Ukraine was using those weapons to kill Russians. We were very close to World War III, and Putin was saying that that's a nuclear red line that we were crossing. And we were just blithely crossing it, which is crazy. So to the extent that they're negotiating, that's a big deal. That dwarfs any other geopolitical issue right now. If we're sitting down and talking in Ukraine, then things are better than they were when we weren't. So that's okay. Let's hope that we continue in that direction. And the whole Europe thing, then again, we could spend a whole show just talking about Europe's self-immolation right now. I mean, they're committing cultural suicide. And, the latest iteration of that is that the U.S. is basically telling NATO that they have to pay their own way, which the U.S. has been saying forever. And the European countries thought they could get away with just living under the U.S. nuclear umbrella and then putting all their money into really generous social programs while totally starving their militaries. Well, now Trump kind of called their bluff, and they're traumatized by that. And they're looking at ramping up military spending and getting ready to go to war with Russia, which is never going to happen. They were on the verge of the dissolution of the euro before this. Because Germany was deindustrializing and gradually losing its status as an industrial power, so they couldn't back up the European Central Bank, which backed up all the quickly going bankrupt countries in the Eurozone. In other words, nobody would buy an Italian bond if they didn't think it was actually a German bond, because the European Central Bank was buying those Italian bonds and Germany was backing the ECB. And, you take that away, and there are countries in the European Union who just aren't viable. And that means the euro stops being viable when those countries start going bankrupt. So that's all happening, the demographics of the European situation are just horrifying on so many levels. So Europe is actually, if they're dumb enough to actually ramp up military spending and then use those weapons to start World War III, That sounds kind of unlikely. You know, a civil war within Europe sounds more likely than than World War III being caused by European aggression, because that just doesn't seem like them anymore. But we'll see. You know, that's an evolving story. And they'll give us a lot more to talk about in coming months and years, probably. But hopefully they don't start World War III. You know, anything else they do, so be it. But just don't attack another nuclear power, please, Europe, you know?
The other thing you mentioned a few moments ago was about the European standoff with, well, through Ukraine's and U.S.-backed forces there. You said a New York Times article just came out today with the breaking news that the U.S. had been involved in the Ukraine war. And it was slightly amusing and painful to see that because of how late this admission is coming. What about this tendency we're seeing for either resignations before you can fire me, or basically covering your rear end by kind of rewriting history to make it look like you didn't know what you knew when you knew it from the mainstream press, et cetera?
The New York Times in particular is desperately trying to become an actual newspaper again, instead of just being a CIA stenographer, which is what they were for the longest time. A little while ago, they did an op-ed piece about COVID that said, we were deceived about COVID, you know, and went into all the lies that the government told during the pandemic and pretended that they were a victim of that instead of one of the perpetrators. You know, their head COVID reporter was saying that, you know, if you even talk about the virus coming out of the Wuhan lab, that's racist, you know, and you're a racist. That was their coverage of the pandemic. And now they just came out with a story about, like you said, surprise, the U.S. was actually involved in Ukraine for the last 10 years. And here's basically what the U.S. did. Ukraine elected a government that was in favor of coexistence with Russia, basically. And that didn't suit NATO and the U.S.'s policy preferences. So they went in and they overthrew that government. They engineered a coup and they installed somebody who was more or less in favor of joining NATO and everything. And they started talking about inducting Ukraine into NATO, which means it's basically a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. You know, back in the early 1960s, Russia tried to basically induct Cuba into an anti-U.S. military alliance, and we were going to fight World War III over that. So it got resolved, but we were ready to nuke Russia if they actually tried to do that. And so Russia was saying the same thing, but in reverse. They were saying, if you move NATO right next to our border into a country where we have a naval base, you know, we have a military presence within part of Ukraine, that is a nuclear red line. And the U.S. went ahead and did it anyhow. You know, they actively started a war in Ukraine. They used the Ukrainians as cannon fodder in a proxy war. And they were willing to, you know, the guys in charge until the last election were willing to take this to the limit. You know, they were willing to fight a nuclear war, apparently, over Ukraine. So anyhow, that's what the New York Times is shocked by. That they're just finding out that this stuff happened, apparently, when they were the ones saying, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, and this was unprovoked Russian aggression and everything. And so now they're taking it all back, apparently, and they're saying, oh, yeah, you know, there were 12 CIA bases, and we had all these biotech warfare labs in there, you know. So basically we were using Ukraine as a base of operations against Russia. So, you know, it's fun to watch this, and it's going to be really funny to come up with or to predict what they discover next, you know, because there's a lot of other stuff out there that turned out to be demonstrably true now. But that the mainstream media still hasn't admitted to being part of. So, you know, it's fun to watch the Times, but there's lots of other media outlets that are going to have to have their own come to Jesus moments and pretend to discover the conspiracies that they were part of, and I'm having fun watching this, I got to say.
So I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to go out on the limb here and say that if you look at the writings of John Rubino over the past 3 years, you're going to start to see future articles coming out of the New York Times saying, wow, we just discovered this. Wow, in fact, you've got all the writing done for them because that'll get them back on the track that they need to be on. Earlier, when you were talking about the self-immolation of Europe, it reminded me of our dear departed friend Rob Kirby talking about what we're seeing was the rise of the first Trump election and then the rise of Millet after that and so on is the rise of nationalism from a grassroots level in the face of globalist oppression. What's going on in France in your view of leading candidates being shifted aside, say, no, you can't participate for the next 5 years, and the next candidate coming under lawfare as well? Are these, as you warned us about, organizations that have power, and if there are globalist backings behind some of the existing deep state in European countries, is that what we're seeing exhibit itself here?
Yeah, globalism and the whole general rule by experts and the political class thing has failed miserably. The experts have basically screwed up everything they've touched, from geopolitics to monetary policy to public health. It goes on and on. To censorship, and the borders, open borders, all of this stuff were things they were in charge of, and all of those things have blown up in their faces. So nobody trusts them anymore. And when people lose faith in the establishment, populism becomes popular. People will vote for political candidates who say, look, you're being screwed over by the 1%. Put me in office and I'll get back for you what was stolen. So that can be left-wing like Bernie Sanders or right-wing like Donald Trump, but it becomes appealing when everybody loses faith in the experts. But the experts are still in charge in a lot of these places. Globalists and technocrats run most of Europe. But in countries like France and Germany, the up-and-coming political parties are populist. So if they just had honest elections, there's a chance that the globalists would lose. And they don't want that to happen. So they're basically taking over social media and they're making it illegal to engage in political speech that is anti-government in any way. And they're prosecuting, they're using lawfare the way the U.S. used it against Trump. They're using the same kind of mechanisms against rising political figures where they either kick them out of the election and say, you can't run, or like with Marine Le Pen just now, they make up charges of embezzlement or something like that and say, okay, now you're banned from politics, and now let's see what we do with your political party. Maybe we'll ban them too. So in Germany and France, it's completely possible that if they had free and fair elections, what they call the far right, but what is actually just populist parties rebelling against globalism, those guys might win, and they are at least suspicious of NATO and the euro, even if they're not anti-NATO and anti-euro. But their suspicion is strong enough that it would make it hard for a lot of the globalist / expert / political class policies to continue. So they would do kind of like what Trump's doing here. They would start shutting down a lot of stuff. And, you saw that in Argentina, where Milei just went in and closed down a big chunk of the government, or in El Salvador, where they just rounded up all these gangs that were making their country incredibly violent and just stuck them in a big prison. Now, I'm not saying this stuff is consistent with the U.S. Constitution, but I am saying it's what you get when you screw up on the scale that today's expert class has screwed up. We shouldn't be surprised that populism is rising, but we also shouldn't be surprised that populism, once in power, is really chaotic, because it's not really a political philosophy. It's just we're going to get back from you what was stolen from you, or for you what was stolen from you. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And most of them are pretty chaotic. It's a revolution when populists take over. So that's what we're headed for. And it already happened in the US, or it's in the process of happening. And Europe is trying to stop it. And it looks like they'll do pretty much anything to stop it. So that's one more aspect of Europe's suicide. They're going authoritarian at the same time they've opened their borders. At the same time they're involving themselves in what could be World War III. It's a continent that will not be a viable continent or a viable civilization a decade from now unless they get serious about preserving European culture.
I promised earlier that we'd circle back to, you had mentioned briefly in passing the preparedness aspect of owning real things rather than just being overexposed to leveraged financial assets, that kind of thing, and how even the most wealthy, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and others, are doing just that. What about real estate? We could talk about residential and commercial real estate. There certainly seems to be a shifting of the tide now. We've seen in our own 55 plus retirement community, we talked to Michael Pinto, who lives in Naples, Florida. We've talked to others in areas which had seen outstanding, nominal gains in growth, but then the strain of increased property taxes on homeowners, the unaffordability of people being able to buy homes, so that the homes that come on the sale on the market aren't selling. And yet there's only been modest decreases so far in offering prices rather than a full-out washout of the real estate market. So you look at this both on the individual level, you also look at it on the institutional level, where huge companies like BlackRock, et cetera, own whole swaths of real estate. What's your view of where we're at in this turning tide of real estate? And if we could look maybe both at residential and commercial, and what affects them?
It is possible that real estate is the catalyst for the next big financial crisis, which would be really surprising in a way, because you don't normally have consecutive bubbles. We had a real estate bubble just a decade ago, or a little more than a decade ago. And that blew up and caused a gigantic financial crisis. So you wouldn't think that real estate would be a bubble again, but it kind of sort of has happened that way. On the commercial side, especially office buildings in this case, a lot of office buildings went up using incredibly cheap financing post-Great Recession because interest rates were so low. And then the pandemic hit and a lot of people stayed home and found out that it's really nice to work from home and they didn't want to go back to offices. So there's a lot of empty buildings out there, or partially empty buildings, that don't generate anything like the cash flow needed to cover their refinancing when their loans come due. And so there are massive embedded losses in the office building sector. And a lot of that bad paper is on the balance sheets of local and regional banks. So you get the real potential for office buildings to go bust, which lead to a lot of banks to go bust, which causes a full-on financial crisis where they have to be bailed out. So that's that. Now, housing is weird too, because really it was housing that was the epicenter of the last crisis. And home prices took a long time to start going up again. But when they went up, they just continued to go up, so that in the US, houses are now almost twice as expensive as they were at the peak of the previous bubble. And it's kind of a frozen market because the people who have cheap mortgages don't want to sell if they have to take out a new mortgage on their next house or anything. So you're seeing people just be stuck in their houses. So prices are crazy high. They're massively unaffordable. The average person can't afford the average house anymore in the US. But sales are minuscule. The number of existing homes that are actually changing hands here are like at 1995 levels, when we had 100 million less people in the US. So that market is frozen, but it's about to be unfrozen in a big way because of three different groups of people. First, it's the baby boomers. My generation, we own a lot of McMansions out there that we can't handle because, they're 3 stories and they've got an acre of land and our hips are sore and stuff. And we just can't manage that kind of property. So unless we have the grandkids move in with us, we're going to have to sell at some point. And there is a ton of baby boomer owned real estate out there that can hit the market pretty soon. Second group is Wall Street. Wall Street has turned houses into a speculative asset. where companies like Blackstone will go in and buy up whole neighborhoods and then convert those houses to rentals at really high levels. They've got an algorithm that shows them how to squeeze the last drop of rental revenue out of these houses. But of course, over the last few years, they've been overpaying. And so as soon as home prices start to roll over or even plateau, then suddenly Wall Street is going to be dumping those speculative assets back on the market. So you're going to have entire neighborhoods coming back on the market at panic level prices because, this was done with financing. And if once a finance or an over-leveraged hedge fund or private equity company blows up because of their real estate, all the other ones will panic out of that market. So that's the second one. And the third one is Airbnb. That's a new market. Only in the last 10 years or so have people built little Airbnb empires of a bunch of apartment buildings or a few houses. And a lot of those aren't working out the way they were expected to. They're not generating enough cash flow. A lot of Airbnb guys are looking at going broke unless they get out of their inventory. And so they're going to start dumping their houses and apartment buildings and condos pretty soon too. So all we need is a rollover in the economy, like a slowdown in economic growth, which we're getting right now. A lot of the estimates for Q1 and Q2 GDP growth are pretty much flatlined right now. So let the economy slow down, appear to be tipping into a recession, and you'll see all these houses just flood the market. And already inventory is starting to rise. So it's happening, but when the economy slows down, then you get a feedback loop where a slowing economy breaks housing, which in turn slows the economy even further, and so on, until we get that recession that's really long overdue. So yeah, I wouldn't be buying a house right now if I had options. And one thing that might work in the real estate sector is a really well-chosen rental house. But you got to have expertise to be able to know that that's what you're getting. And, the average person buying a condo in San Francisco or something like that, I would say don't do it now. Wait 2 or 3 years and there will be some outrageous bargains waiting for you then.
You write a lot on actionable steps such as these that people should consider or do right away if they haven't. Where can people find your Substack and make sure that they're staying in touch with your writings?
Well, I'm at rubino.substack.com. And yeah, like you said, it's about actionable stuff because there's an awful lot you can do right now in response for all these things that are coming. And the intellectual challenge is to set yourself up so you're doing the things that you're comfortable doing and you understand as far as real assets and betting against the market, et cetera goes. And so that you're as well positioned and as resilient as you can possibly be.
John Rubino, founder originally of dollarcollapse.com, more recently of your Substack. Thank you again for joining us here on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks, Dunnigan. Talk to you soon.
Now through Monday, April 7th, in honor of Silver Squeeze 2.0, for any Monster Box of Silver Eagles, we'll give you 2 additional Silver Eagles at no cost. And unlike some other Silver Squeeze deals, there's no limit. So if you purchase 1 Silver Eagle Monster Box, you get 502 Silver Eagles. If you purchase 10 Monster Boxes, you're getting a full tube of Eagles for no cost. Call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.